Okay, so with that out of the way, we can actually move on with the webpage content for today. Now, if you just want to quickly review some of the slides that I put up in there, you can look them up in the Week 4 VR tab. So everything should be outlined in there for your convenience. Now, for the web page itself, really there's two main steps. So step one is importing the avatar setup that we'll be using for our VR project. So that's this FPS controller right here in Week 4. So go ahead and download that through the download link. So again, it's FPS controller. Make sure you save that somewhere that you remember, because you'll be creating a brand new project and then importing that. And then doing some basic testing to make sure that the avatar is working properly. And I've actually outlined the steps in there, but I'll go ahead and do a quick demo as well at the same time if people want to follow that instead. And then once you have the avatar set up, you just go ahead and start finding the art assets that you might end up using for your virtual environment. So this is more of a brainstorming kind of session, figuring out what you want to do. And hopefully by having a look around at what's available in the asset store, you might be able to stumble across an idea. Or if you already have an idea that you want to go for, you can at least do a sanity check to make sure that you have enough art assets available to actually go forward with the application that you want to make for assignment 2. All right, I'm actually going to stop recording. There we go. And then at the bottom, you just have like a list of resources. Again, if you're interested in having a look at some of the tools that I touched on in the slides, then definitely have a look at those. They're a mix of manual pages and Unity tutorials. There's even like an official tutorial series under the particle system. So it's a lot extensive because there's just a lot of properties to cover with the particle system, but it's there if you want to sort of have like a extensive look. Okay. Now for the live demo itself, I'm actually gonna stop screen sharing for a bit and move over to a different screen. All right, so I've actually gone ahead and downloaded the FPS controller package from the Week 4 tab in Milo. So now, to actually import that into our VR project, I'm just gonna go ahead and create a 3D project from Unity Hub. So again, make sure your template is set to 3D and then just give it an appropriate name. And go ahead and create the project and wait for the thing to finish loading. Now, again, remember, so this web page here, oh, sorry, where is there we go. So the instructions that I've written here is taking into account the FPS controller, but if you already have your own headset today and you want to look into setting up Oculus integration package, please let me know. And I'll do like a quick live demo of how to do it as well, so you can follow along. All right. Oh, whenever you get window like messages like these, just make sure to skip new version because we're just sticking to the one version as always. There we go. Okay. All right. So once you have your new project set up and running, you can then go ahead and go back to your FPS controller file that you downloaded, and then just open that by double-clicking. And that should bring back your Unity editor window and start the importing. Again, in the import package window, just make sure that everything clicked on the left, so like the checkboxes, they should be by default, and then go ahead and click on the import button on the bottom right corner. Now, the package itself is only about 214 kilobytes, so it's a fairly short import process, which is really good. And once that's done, you should be able to see a new folder here called First Person Avatar. Now, really what you just want to do to add that to your scene is just open up First Person Avatar and then Prefabs in your project view. And then you should be able to see FPS controller prefab here. So basically you just drag that from the project view to the scene view, like so. Now, one thing that I like to do whenever I add new game objects into the scene is I like to center them. So while I have FPS controller selected, I'm just going to set the position values on all the three axes, so X, Y, and Z, to 0. And that just ensures that I can actually find the FPS controller object at the center of the world, which is a lot easier to reference. Also, once you have the FPS controller object into your scene, make sure you delete the main camera object because you only need the one camera in a scene at any given time, which is this FPS controller here. All right, so once you have the avatar set up, so the FPS controller, you also need to make sure that you have like some sort of floor that the avatar can drop down to, because the FPS controller is actually affected by physics, which includes gravity. And what's going to happen is that if you just immediately play your application without having like some sort of floor that the avatar can drop down to, you'll just, as you can see here, your avatar will just continuously fall down and you won't be able to do anything. So usually what I like to do is I just like to create a plain object, which is a primitive. So if I just go to the hierarchy window on the left and then right click in like an empty section of the window, that should bring up the create menu. So go ahead and select 3D object and then select plane on the right hand menu. And that should generate that flat 3D plane, which you can use as the floor. And again, just make sure that the plane object itself is centered. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the position to 0 on the 3 axes. And also, you can also change the scale of the plane if you want to have like a wider or larger floor. I'm just going to set that to 5 on the X and the Z axes. And now, if you actually test out the application, you'll see that the avatar is actually sitting on top of the floor now, which is good. Now, in terms of controlling the avatars, again, it's the same thing as with the Create FPS from last week. So use the WASD keys or the arrow keys to move around, depending on your preference. You use your mouse to control the camera. And also, while you're moving, you can hold down Shift to sprint. So basically just faster, and then you can also use the space bar to jump around. And once you've made sure that that is all working nice and cleanly, then you can pretty much move on to step 2. If that actually brings it up, which is just starting to find the art assets that you potentially use in your virtual environment. So that's having a look around for some inspiration of what you potentially do for your project. One thing with the FPS controller though is while you have the game object selected, and if you head over to the inspector window on the right, you should be able to see this component here called first person controller. So this is actually where you can set up some, where you can change some settings depending on your preference. So you have stuff like walk speed and run speed, which just defines how fast your avatar moves. So the higher the number, the faster your avatar is. And you've also got something, for example, like head bob. Now, if I just quickly create a cube here, and then I just move the FPS controller right there. So notice, hang on, but let's move that up. So notice how when you're moving with the first person controller, you'll notice that the camera actually bobs up and down while moving. So that is what we call like a head bob effect. Just physically sort of emulates how your head would bob whenever you're walking around. If that's a bit annoying for you and you want to disable that, you can go ahead and select the FPS controller and then untick the use head bob checkbox in the settings. And yeah, that should disable it now if we have a look. Yeah, so now you've got that smooth movement happening when you're moving your FPS controller. So definitely have a look at some of these settings and feel free to experiment as well, because that can certainly definitely affect the overall user experience as well, based on how their avatar is moving throughout the scene. All right. Now, when you're looking at the asset store, if you want to bring it up in the Unity editor, you should be able to see that tab here in the middle part of your interface. So you should be able to see asset store. Now, if you can't see this tab at all in whatever part of your interface, you can just go to Window on the menu bar at the top, and then just select Asset Store, which is somewhere near to the top part of the drop-down menu, and that can bring up this tab here. Now I'm just going to resize this. All right, so now that you're in the asset store, one thing that you will usually do when you want to look for 3D models, which is what most people are going to be looking for anyway, in the filter section on the right-hand side, you can just tick 3D for 3D models. And what you can do as well is if you expand the 3D list by clicking on this arrow here on the right, you can actually select whether you want, stuff like animations or characters or environments or props. So definitely take advantage of those depending on what you're looking for your environment. And also under pricing, you just want to make sure that you have free assets ticked as well. And that should show you all the free assets that you can use for your projects. Now, usually when you're downloading 3D assets from the asset store, usually they come either as a standalone package where you just have the one 3D models, like say for example for this one, you just have the robot itself, or sometimes it comes in these sort of packs, which is basically like store more assets packed together in the single asset package. So say for example, this one here, I believe, yep. So Dream Forest Tree, for example, consists of these 6 different 3D models of like trees. So this would be really handy if you're doing something like an outdoor scene, for example. So definitely have a look around and see if anything grabs your interest. Now, the thing with these assets is that each asset is going to be different. And what I mean by that is the way the folder structure of that asset is going to be different, and the contents of that package is going to be different. So say, for example, I'm looking for a house 3D model, right? And say, for example, I decide to use this house. So it's a package called Baker's House. So if I want to add this to my project, what I need to do is I need to click import here on this page. Or if you haven't downloaded it yet, you need to make sure that you have it downloaded. And again, in the import package that comes up, just make sure everything is ticked and then click on import. And once you finish the importing, you should be able to see a brand new folder again in your assets folder. So in my case, it's going to be Baker House. Now, usually when you're importing packages from the asset store and you want to add them to your scene, what you're looking for is either a prefab file or a 3D model file. So if, say, I want to add this house, I would go ahead and find something like a 3D model or prefab folder. And as you can see here, we have prefabs. So we locked out. And then here we go. So we've got Baker House and Barrel. So if I go ahead and drag and drop that to my scene, then that pretty much showcases the actual house asset itself. And apparently also comes with barrels. So if you want to sort of spice up the house a bit, you can just keep adding more. And again, like I said earlier, once you have the assets into your project, it's just a matter of adjusting where they are, how they're rotated, how big they are with the transform tools. That's pretty much environment design in a nutshell, really. Now, for some assets, something to keep in mind is that sometimes they might not have colliders set up. So if you have a look here, for example, you'll see that I can actually pass through this 3D model, with this particular asset. If you find that this is what's happening with you, an easy fix for that, usually anyway, is you can just add a mesh collider component on the actual game object itself. So if I go ahead and select the Baker house, for example, which is the one that's missing the collider, and then head over to the inspector window on the right, and then click on the add component button. And that should bring up this component pop-up box here. In the search bar above, just search up Mesh Collider, which I already had in the results, and then go ahead and select Mesh Collider. And now you should be able to see this Mesh Collider box here on the component list in the inspector. Now if I go ahead and try to pass through the house again, you'll find that I won't be able to do so because it now has the collider component on it. Now this won't work for some assets that you download from the store. If it doesn't work with a mesh collider, then you can just stick with like basic shapes. So say for example, like a box collider. But the main disadvantage of this is that you won't be able to exactly wrap around the game object. The best thing that you can do is just do an approximation of the boundaries. You can actually change the size of the collider itself with this property here. So if I just do something like that, and that is pretty close enough. So yeah, it's just a matter of experimenting with these components as well. All right. All right, I'm just gonna stop screen sharing for a bit, but if anything comes up, I'll make sure to enable it again and let you guys know.